Ukraine braces for imminent Russian offensive as reinforcements pour in. New Russian offensive imminent, Ukraine on high alert as key regions brace for attack. Breaking news, Ukrainian official claims Putin begging for negotiations through intermediaries. Enjoy watching and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on important news. Russia is pouring reinforcements into eastern Ukraine ahead of a new offensive that could begin next week along a front where there have been relentless battles for months, a Ukrainian governor said. Desperate for Western military aid to arrive, Ukraine anticipates a major offensive could be launched by Russia for symbolic reasons around the February 24th anniversary of the invasion, which Moscow persists in calling a special military operation. Ukraine is itself planning a spring offensive to recapture lost territory, but awaiting delivery of promised longer-range Western missiles and battle tanks, with some analysts saying the country was months away from being ready. We are seeing more and more Russian reserves being deployed in our direction. We are seeing more equipment being brought in, said Serhiy Haidai, Ukraine's governor of the mainly Russian-occupied Luhansk province. They bring ammunition that is used differently than before. It is not round-the-clock shelling anymore. They are slowly starting to save, getting ready for a full-scale offensive, Mr. Haidai told Ukrainian television. It will most likely take them 10 days to gather reserves. After February 15th, we can expect this offensive at any time. The war is reaching a pivotal point as its first anniversary approaches, with Ukraine no longer making gains as it did in the second half of 2022 and Russia pushing forward with hundreds of thousands of mobilized reserve troops. President Volodymyr Zelensky said personnel changes on the border and frontline will bolster Ukraine's military efforts amid uncertainty over the future of his defense minister, just as Russia advances in the east for the first time in 6 months. In his evening address, Mr. Zelensky said he wanted to combine military and managerial experience in local and central government, but did not directly address confusion about whether his defense minister, Oleksiy Reznikov, would be replaced. On Sunday, David Arakhamia, head of Mr. Zelensky's parliamentary bloc, said Mr. Reznikov would be transferred to another ministerial job, but yesterday he wrote that there will be no personnel changes in the defense sector this week. Mr. Zelensky said he needs to show that Ukraine was a safe steward of billions of dollars of Western military and other aid, and his government is engaged in the biggest political and administrative shakeup since Russia's invasion nearly a year ago. In a number of regions, particularly those on the border or on the front line, we will appoint leaders with military experience. Those who can show themselves to be the most effective in defending against existing threats, he said. The European Union said Mr. Zelensky has been invited to take part in a summit of EU leaders, amid reports he could be in Brussels as soon as this week, in what would be only his second known foreign trip since the invasion began. Mr. Reznikov told Ukrainska Pravda on the weekend that intelligence suggested any new Russian offensive would likely come from the east or south. Their dream is to expand the land corridor to Crimea in order to continue supplies. Therefore, of course, the key risks are the east, the south, and after that the north, he said. Russia annexed Crimea in 2014. Ukrainian defense analyst Oleksandr Kovalenko said a new Russian offensive could come from one of 4 directions: the eastern Luhansk region, the Donetsk region, the Zaporizhia region, and the city and port of Mariupol. Things are more serious in Donetsk region, particularly around Bakhmut and Avdiivka. And the Russians will be boosting their contingents there as well as equipment and paratroops, Mr. Kovalenko, from the information resistance group Think Tanks, told Ukrainian Radio NV. For months, Russia's main target in eastern Ukraine has been Bakhmut, where its state media said the Wagner mercenary group had gained a foothold. Ukraine said yesterday evening that Russian forces had trained tank, mortar, and artillery fire there in the past 24 hours. Mr. Kovalenko said Mariupol, captured by Russian forces last May, could be used by the Russians to bring in troops and equipment for a new offensive. It could serve as a transport hub for the Russian occupation forces, he said. Mr. Kovalenko said Ukraine's counteroffensive would not happen anytime soon and Ukrainian forces would be assuming a defensive position, particularly in Donetsk. It may be an active defense, but a defensive position nonetheless. The idea will remain to block any Russian advance, he said. Things could change more quickly in other sectors. But this situation could go on for 2 to 2.5 months. That is the time required for providing the tanks for brigades, training, and getting everything outfitted. A top Ukrainian official on Monday claimed Russian President Vladimir Putin is begging Kyiv to negotiate with Moscow through other countries acting as intermediaries. Speaking in an interview with Radio NV, Alexei Danilov, the secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, NSDC, said Russia is considering Brazil as one of the possible intermediaries. Putin is giving orders to fully besiege Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts. There is no secret behind it. Moreover, they are now starting to realize that they are definitely not able to reach those goals of occupying our country that they had previously set for themselves. This is why today they are begging. They are involving a whole pool of intermediaries, Danilov said, as translated by Ukrainska Pravda. At the moment, they are conducting a huge work with separate groups in order to incline them towards negotiations. They are considering Brazil and whoever you can imagine as intermediaries. Let us negotiate to somehow solve this issue. Danilov later added that Ukraine has 4 conditions for Russia before it considers negotiations, including the withdrawal of Russian troops from all temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories, claiming responsibility through a tribunal for all civilians killed in the war, security guarantees for Ukraine, and accountability. Danilov's claim comes 2 months after Putin said Russia is ready to negotiate with Ukraine but blamed Kyiv and Western allies for refusing to engage in the talks. Despite talks of Putin's negotiation efforts, Ukraine is still bracing for a possible Russian offensive in the spring that could target eastern and southern parts of the country. When and where exactly the new offensive will begin is still unclear, but Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov last week told French media that they are expecting Russia to send at least 500,000 troops to attack. Reznikov's estimates were echoed by Vadim Skibitsky, deputy head of Ukrainian Defense Intelligence, who also asserted that Russia's plans for a new offensive show that Moscow has no intention of ending this war. Russia's invasion of Ukraine will mark its first anniversary on February 24th. Since the start of the war last year, Russia has already